Could Paul George potentially be on the move? Again, this time potentially in a trade with the Utah Jazz. We're going to cover that here and now. But let me know in the comments down below what you guys think about this entire topic and basically that they could potentially take on PG if they're able to get the number 3 pick back. So ultimately, let's see what happens with this. Hope you guys enjoy and let's dive in. So we have a few things to go over. So we're going to look at this tweet. There's a follow-up from the person that's being aggregated. And then we also have an article to read. So the Jazz and 76ers have discussed a trade that would send Paul George to Utah. So here's the thing with this. So the person that posted this was Andy Larson. Andy Larson is pretty plugged in as a beat writer for the Salt Lake Tribune and covers the Utah Jazz extensively. He did follow up here saying, well, I got aggregated today. It's always funny because like all these guys that are like Andy they hate when this happens. Like they hate when they say something, especially like off the cuff on the side or like a podcast appearance and it gets aggregated and put out there like huge major news. And so obviously, this is mostly a rumor, so keep that in mind. Take from that what you will. I'll say this is a point of clarification. While all of the possibilities I mentioned, like Sexton to Dallas, LA interested in Kessler, Philadelphia's interest in a pick 3 and 5 swap, have been discussed, they haven't gotten into the serious stages to my knowledge. I'll also say this. What I don't know far exceeds what I do know. Those are real discussions that I've heard about from real people over the last few weeks, but I'm generally not kept updated on the status of what's currently happening. And yeah, I think that's pretty common with most of these rumors. You can hear nuggets of stuff, and sometimes you hear nuggets on rumors that have already passed. Like they're not even negotiating anymore. You hear about it like, oh, they were interested in so-and-so. This was something. This was a framework. They got to the 9-yard line, whatever, right? And you hear about this stuff, and he's clarifying what he doesn't know is more than what he does know, because there's obviously so much behind the scenes that goes into this stuff that he may not know about. So again, grain of salt, but what would you guys think about that? So let's go ahead and take a look at this overall, the article from Sean, who says the Utah Jazz are only 1 week away from being on the clock with the 5th overall pick in the 2025 NBA draft, barring any trades. That being said, trade talks are heating up and the Jazz could make a move. Utah lost out on the lottery sweepstakes last month after finishing the 24-25 season with the league worst 17 wins. Rumors have floated about the Jazz trading up to acquire a top talent, but recent reports suggests they may not actually make a move. Regardless, offers have been made to Utah. In a recent interview on the Locked On Jazz podcast, like I said, he was on a podcast, Andy Larson with the Salt Lake Tribune said Utah has garnered interest from Philadelphia in a deal that would move superstar wing Paul George. And this is what Andy says, and we didn't get this to read the other things we read so far. I do think it's true that the Philadelphia 76ers are interested in trading down to number 5. Potentially, if they can get off the Paul George deal and that contract, Larson said. I don't think necessarily that may not make a lot of sense for the Jazz, given how long the contract is and how iffy Paul George was. I don't think the Jazz are going to take that offer, but I do think that's an offer that has been presented. So a few things of note in this. Again, they're talking about basically trying to trade down. They're saying, hey, if you really want somebody at number 3, that there's somebody you really love, guess what? You can move up to number 3, swap picks with us. All you got to do is give us matching salary and take on this Paul George contract. Now, we have been on the channel, Trevor and I have said on a lot of occasions that, Philly is kind of screwed. Okay. Now, there's a possibility. There's a world. It exists out there in the multiverse, Doctor Strange and all, where Paul George is able to come back, next season after a injury-riddled season for him and mostly the team in general, and look like the Paul George of old and be worth that money, right? But I think there's a stronger chance none of that stuff mostly happens. I think he's going to continue the trajectory downward as he's been injured a ton and he continues maybe to deal with some injuries going forward. Not hoping that he does, of course, but I think that's just when you start dealing with it, it seems like you kind of just keep going. And then lastly, I don't think Paul George is going to be a guy that's going to average more than 20 points a game. And if you're somebody not averaging over 20 points per game, making $55 or so million, it's kind of, I don't know, bad. Like it's just kind of hard to deal with, right? Very few players in the NBA are able to get that done. Like somebody like a Jimmy Butler is on a similar, discussion. mostly everything I said largely applies to Jimmy as well, except Jimmy's been able to impact winning at a higher level than Paul George over the last number of years. Anyway, so yeah, basically, long story short, PG is on one of the worst contracts in the NBA. And I am legitimately concerned. Like looking at this deal, 49, it just ended 49, 51, 6, 54, 56, and 27, 28. Player option for $56 million in 27, 28. He's absolutely picking up that deal. And this is why the Clippers were apprehensive about giving him that contract. This team swooped in and gave him a contract that no one else really was interested in. Quiet as it's kept, I'm worried about Embiid too. Looking at that Embiid salary, we've said this before. I'm worried about Embiid, man. 28, 29, 69 million. I am worried as hell. So anyway, if you're the Sixers, you're dealing with that. And obviously things didn't go your way. And if you're the Sixers, you also probably would be better off pivoting away from Paul George because you probably should have never signed him in the first place. But hindsight being 2020, maybe they have a better year next year, and we're looking at what they had this year and all that. But anyway, probably should have never signed him in the first place. You're probably better off just pivoting, rebuilding around Maxey and Embiid, and quietly, mostly Maxey, because he is your younger star at that point, and hope that Maxey continues to improve and turn into more of a legitimate superstar in the NBA or getting close to that anyway. It's kind of hard to do that, but you get my point. So anyway, that being said, if they do that, that would be the case. Now, on the topic for the Utah Jazz, the Jazz low-key got screwed. I don't want to say low-key. They absolutely did get screwed. And to me, that should tell teams not to tank as hard anymore. I mean, they had the best odds to get number one. And they fell as far as they could fall. If I remember correctly, they couldn't have fallen even a single slot further. They got absolutely railed by the draft lottery. And that is crazy to think about that. And they even were saying, we're probably we're probably mostly done with that. That's basically what they were saying. I believe that was Ainge's son whenever he was, giving media availability. But they said they're mostly done with that. And yeah, I think that they still are in a rebuild period. They still need to consider that. And so if you do bring in a Paul George, your books are going to look kind of nasty, unless that's a swap with like Markkanen or something, which I think that the Sixers would probably welcome at that point. But I would assume that the Sixers would probably target somebody like a John Collins, try to get flexibility around Collins, Sexton, Collin and Collins, Clarkson, like these guys that are on expiring deals and big numbers that you can aggregate together potentially to pull off a deal, right? Maybe you have to pull in a third team, but I think that the Sixers probably, again, would mostly be targeting having that flexibility and or getting players that are useful. Because again, that Paul George contract is an absolute albatross in my opinion. And so, for them, it just depends on how much do you like. If you're going to be bad anyway, it doesn't really matter if you take on a couple of bad contracts, or a bad contract in this case, Paul George. But the Jazz have also signaled that they want to be better. They want to be competitive. Now, you've got to show me that that's what you want to do, because they had a chance to be competitive a couple years ago. They were, but then hard pivoted right at the last hour to turn into more of a tanking team. And the guys on the Jazz talked about how they didn't like that. Lauri Markkanen, Walker Kessler, these other guys, they didn't really like that, right? It always rubs players the wrong way when your team's going out of its way to lose games organizationally, because that's not a decision the players make. That's a decision organizations make, right? So ultimately, I do wonder about that. But if you're going to just be bad and you're going to accept that that's your reality, maybe you move off of some of your guys. Maybe Lowry is a part of a different deal or something like that. But whatever, if that's the case, I'd consider it, right? I'd consider it. Maybe you and PG work out like a buyout next year or something like that. I don't imagine that'll happen, but it's on the table, I guess. But, I'd consider taking on that deal. And if you're Philly, what that signals to me is that you don't really love anybody at 3, and you're pretty sure you can get whoever you want at 5. Or you've got 2 guys that you're like neck and neck with, and you're pretty sure you'd be able to get one of those guys at 5 as well, which is both a good thing and a bad thing. But to be fair, the fact that they jumped all the way to 3 to get the flexibility to even propose this as a trade is great, because this is something that they didn't, in their wildest imagination, have as being able to do this, right? Being able to be in this position in the first place. So overall, though, let me know what you guys think about the potential idea of a Paul George trade. And if this does happen, do you think that the Jazz should pull it off? Do you think that this is a win-win, lose-lose? What happens here ultimately? I think that, to be honest, like I said, if you're going to be bad anyway and you're okay with that reality, then it's not the worst thing if you're the Jazz, especially because you get to get somebody at 3 that you may. And if you're the Jazz, the only reason you're doing this also is because you feel like super sure that either the Sixers will spite you and take who you want at 3. So you better keep that draft board secret. Or the team at 4, I don't remember who that is at this point, takes that player too. So you feel like you want to just shield yourself from that. So you jump up as well. Ultimately, though, let me know what you guys think and who the winners in a potential trade are. But again, it's potential until we see it.